Hey everyone, it's Alexei Uzas from Exile Accelerator. In this video, I'm going to reveal to you the one trait that will guarantee your success as a filmmaker. Well, before I get started, I want to let you know that spots have opened up for our Producing Accelerator program that helps filmmakers execute their creative vision using a producing system that allows them to consistently finance and produce their own films. So if you want to learn more about that program, you're going to want to stick around until the end of this video. And for the best filmmaking advice, subscribe to this channel and be notified when we post a video every week. Before I dive into this video, I want to give you a quick background about myself so that you can understand why this one trait is so important when it comes to independent filmmaking. So my name is Alexei Uzas. I run a production and distribution company in Australia called Exile Entertainment. I've lead produced 4 feature films. I've helped another 4 features close finance. I've distributed over 20 films in Australia and New Zealand. And I have 2 films that are scheduled for production in 2021. And that's all in the last 5 years. So what I want to speak about in this video is something that I have really used and have stuck to throughout my filmmaking career. And it really has been the secret to me being able to now be part of 10 financed films in only 5 years. And now I can reveal to you that that number one trait is self-reliance. The first thing to explain is, well, what is self-reliance? And really it's being able to rely on your own resources and your own powers to achieve something. And so why is that important in film? Well, it's really important for 2 reasons. The first is that when it comes to finance, the last thing that you want to do is be reliant on someone else to get your film into production. Because what you're doing, if you do that, is really you're putting the fate of your project and the fate of your filmmaking career into someone else's hands. And I really shouldn't have to explain more because that should really say it all. But I'll go a step further and say that if you've ever tried to work with another producer or an EP or a government agency or a Hollywood executive, I'm sure you've run into this problem where, you bring them on board the project and it all sounds great at the start and they promise the world, but then very quickly it becomes apparent that they're not able to pull their weight or they're not able to deliver on what they said they were going to do. And so by relying on these people, you've now put your project in their hands. And unfortunately, most often than not, what happens is that project doesn't gain any real traction and it doesn't get to the point where you need it to get to in order to get financed and into production. And so when it comes to finance, being self-reliant, being able to raise finance yourself is absolutely critical if you want to be a long-term filmmaker, if you want a long-term career as a filmmaker. Because otherwise you're always going to be at the mercy of other people. The second reason it's so important in film is because of the creative side. And really, as a creative, as a filmmaker, your desire is to express your unique point of view or to say something, that is unique to you or unique to your perception of the world, and to be able to tell that in the most authentic way possible. And so if you don't have control over your project, then it's very easy for other people to get involved in the project and either water it down or sanitize it or take it in a direction that you don't want it to go in. And so when it comes to being self-reliant, one of the most important reasons to be self-reliant is the creative. Because if you're self-reliant, then you get to call the shots. You get to decide the creative decisions and you get to decide on the direction, the creative direction of your project. So being self-reliant is so important for these two reasons, because it does give you full creative control over your project, and it gives you control over the progress of your project. And these two things are absolutely paramount if you want to be an independent filmmaker and if you want to build a career as a filmmaker. Okay, so I want to give you a couple of examples of filmmakers that practice self-reliance and have allowed themselves to become extremely successful because they've been self-reliant, they've become self-reliant. So the first example is Jason Blum, who runs the production company Blumhouse. And most filmmakers will know either about Jason Blum or about Blumhouse. If you don't, he's the producer behind films like Get Out, Paranormal Activity, a bunch of highly profitable, highly successful horror films. And he is one of the great success stories of the film industry of the past 15 years or so. I'm just taking a guess there, how long he's been operating. But Jason was working at Miramax, at a distribution company in the US, before he decided to go out on his own. And he very quickly established himself as someone that was able to make really highly profitable horror films. So he would produce horror films at a really low cost that would become hyper profitable. So an example is Paranormal Activity, which he picked up for around $15,000. And the production budget was about $15,000, and it went on to make hundreds of millions of dollars. And he developed a model that he took to one of the studios, whereby if he made films under a certain budget level and within a certain genre, they would essentially greenlight those films. Now, I'm sure there were some other conditions attached to that, but that was pretty much the crux of it. And so what he was able to do is, by really becoming self-reliant early on, by picking films that could achieve profitability and then doubling down on that business model and that finance model, he was essentially able to make any film that he wanted to make, provided that it fit within certain parameters. And as well as this, because of the profitability of the films that he was making, his production company was able to grow. He was able to invest in development. He was able to invest in building his company. That company now operates in TV. It has a deal with Amazon. So he's been able to really reinvest the profits from that film back into his business and build that company up. And he's at a point where he really is self-reliant. He's not relying on external financiers, third parties to come in and finance each of his films. He's at a point now where financing his films and his TV shows are really quite easy for him. And it's because he's set up this model for himself. And it's because from early on in his business, he became self-reliant. Another great example of this is Tyler Perry, who now is one of the most valuable filmmakers in the entertainment industry. And the reason for this is that he's been able to build and grow and hone in on an audience that's hungry for his films and hungry for his content. And I mean, that's taken him years to do, but it's something that he was doing from the very start. If you go back and read about how he got started, he was putting on his own plays. He was doing everything required to get people, to attend those plays. He would then collect emails at the end of those plays so that he could keep marketing to that customer base. And slowly, this built up over time. He was able to hone his craft. He was able to hone his ideas. And he was able to build what now is essentially a juggernaut of a business. And I read somewhere, I think his email list is over like 800,000. So this is someone that is absolutely self-reliant. He doesn't have to go and pander to anyone else. He creates the films that he wants to make, the TV shows that he wants to make. He's now running a fully fledged studio in Georgia that he owns the land. He owns all the IP in all his work. And so he is one of the great examples of a filmmaker who has become self-reliant. And so these are just two examples of filmmakers that understood that by becoming self-reliant, they would have much more power and much more control over their creative ideas. They would not have to rely on external financiers every time they were trying to get a project into production and financed. They wouldn't have to try and prove themselves over and over, because very early on they understood who their audience was, they mined that audience, they became self-reliant, and now they're in a position where they're able to just churn out work consistently and become fully self-reliant. And so these, I think, are the two great examples of the last 10, 15 years of filmmakers that have absolutely demonstrated this trait and have shown the extreme value that you can build for your personal brand, but also for your business if you become self-reliant. So right now I want to give you some examples from my own filmmaking career, my own journey, to show you the importance of self-reliance and how that has played such an integral role in me being able to consistently finance and produce films. So the first example that I'll give you is that when I produced my first film, which was a horror film, it became apparent to me early on that it would be difficult to attach an Australian distributor to the project. So rather than give up, I took on the trait of being self-reliant, and I started to learn about distribution. I distributed that film myself, but then I actually realized the importance of understanding distribution as a producer, and I understood how having a distribution arm to my company would allow me to actually become more self-reliant. And the reason for that is that in Australia, having a distributor is one of the requirements to being able to successfully obtain our rebate, our cash rebate. That is one of the ways that we finance films in Australia. So I understood that by not having a distribution arm, I would always be relying on other distributors to hopefully come on board my project. But understanding that distribution was going through a big change, I got involved in around 2015, so Netflix was just coming in. I kind of anticipated that it would be difficult for distributors to be putting up any significant advances when it came to getting on board a project early. So I dove into distribution. I worked with a distribution company for about a year or a year and a half before going out on my own and distributing films. And so this has really been one of the most important parts for me as a filmmaker, because firstly, it allowed me to understand the distribution side of the business, and that's something that's extremely important to understand as a producer. But second to that, it also allowed me to finance some of my own films without needing to rely on another distributor coming on board the project. Another example that I want to give you is agency funding. So, when I create a finance plan for my projects, I don't incorporate agency funding into those finance plans. And the reason for that is because attaining finance from an agency, a screen agency, a government agency, is something where there's absolutely no guarantee of. And it's very hard for you to have control over that process, because there are a number of different criteria that they need to satisfy before they invest in a project. And so I understood very early on that if I was going to have control over the financing process, if I was going to be able to get films into production consistently, I would need control over the financing. And so while there are some films that I've worked on where we have ultimately attained agency funding, it's never been part of the plan from the start. And actually, on the one film where we did factor that in to the finance plan early on, we didn't get the agency funding. And so, but of course, because I have always made it part of my rule kind of not to rely on agency funding, we had been operating two finance plans. So we had the model with the agency funding and we had the model without it. So we went in for agency funding, we were hoping we would get it. We spent almost a year and a half trying to get it, and then ultimately we didn't get it. And so it kind of proved my point that you absolutely need to be self-reliant and to have the ability to raise finance on your projects without relying on agency funding. Another example that's not to do just with financing, but it is to do with being self-reliant, is that I was working on a project and we attached a casting director to the project with the hope of them going out and helping us attract some A-list cast to the project. And unfortunately what happened was, once I handed over that part of the producing process to a casting director, it just stalled. It didn't go anywhere. And really that was because the casting director didn't want to stick their neck out with the project and didn't want to try to use their contacts and their networks to help push the project forward. We were very early on in the project's life. We didn't have any finance or real finance in place. And so from their position, it was just too risky. But what happened from my end was, because I handed over that part of the producing process, that part just stalled, and we probably lost about 6 to 8 months where really nothing happened in terms of the casting process. And once I identified that I had stopped becoming self-reliant, that I had let go of that part of the producing process, and once I took that back on myself as a producer to become self-reliant, I started reaching to talent agents myself, and very quickly we started getting responses, we started getting actors reading the script, and I think within about 2 months we had cast the lead role for the film. So again, that was just another learning curve for me, and it was another kind of reinforcement that as a producer, as a filmmaker, you absolutely need to be self-reliant during all aspects of the filmmaking process, because as soon as you hand those really important parts over to someone else, you run the risk of the film not progressing, or not progressing as fast as you would have liked. And so I want to summarize this all by really driving home the point of why being self-reliant is the most important trait that you can have as an independent filmmaker. So you can learn all the lessons, you can read all the books, you can do all the courses, you can learn everything there is to learn about independent filmmaking, about film finance, about distribution, about shooting a film. But really all of that counts for nothing without this one trait. Because if you don't have the ability to use your own power and your own resources to get your films into production, to execute your creative vision, then you're in for a world of pain as a filmmaker. And it's going to be impossible for you to build a career as a filmmaker. Because having this one trait is the difference between you being able to get films into production consistently, which will then allow you to build a career as a filmmaker. And so really, if there's one trait that you can develop, that you can try and hone in on, that you can practice every single day of your life, it is becoming self-reliant. Okay, so that's it for this video. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you thought in the comments. I'd also love to hear about any ways that you practice being self-reliant as a filmmaker. Now, if you'd like to learn more about our Producing Accelerator program that helps filmmakers gain self-reliance by teaching them how to finance, produce, and distribute their own films, then head to the link in the description below where you can set up a time to speak with either me or a member of my team, and we'll be going through your project and working out exactly where you're at with it, where you need to get to, and if we can help. It's absolutely free to set up the call, and on the call, we'll be helping you put together a strategy for your project, and we'll also be taking you through the steps that you can start taking today to become self-reliant as a filmmaker. And if you like this video, check out these videos next on how to up your filmmaking game.